Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. It's been a minute since I've said that, and it feels great to be back in the swamp, my friends. It's good to see y'all here if you're still dwelling in these waters with me. Today we're going to be sharing some creepy, downright strange, and allegedly true stories from viewers of the show. They sent in some very interesting and what I could say horrifying encounters from the great outdoors. Whether it be working out in the deep woods, hunting, enjoying themselves on vacation, or something else. These stories will truly freak you out. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to potentially see it and share it with everyone here. Now, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and get ready for these creepy and downright strange horror stories that'll freak you out tonight. Hello, my name is George, and I work as a police officer for the Shenandoah County Emergency Center in Strasburg, Virginia. It isn't an ideal job for me, but it became a backup option since I originally wanted to become an actor after graduating college. Still, I couldn't secure a role when I auditioned for some TV shows and movies. While working my shifts, I wasn't that hardcore, I would sometimes arrest people who did some illegal things without any problems, but I never really had such a distressing moment as the one I'm about to tell you about. One night last December, close to midnight, the center received a 911 call about a woman allegedly acting erratically and damaging property at the Ramada at a Wyndham hotel. I was sent out to find the woman. When I arrived at the scene in the parking lot, I saw a barefoot woman holding something that I did not really recognize, but I could tell it definitely didn't belong to her. It was this woman that we had received the calls about. I told her to come to where I was and that she would be safe. She was acting crazy and erratic, to say the least. The woman asked me if I was going to take her to jail. Before I could even answer her question, she started to grab at me, and I was trying to get a hold of her. But she managed to escape. She was running away from me at a pretty crazy speed. I then pulled my taser out. While chasing her, I lost sight of her momentarily, but saw her again as she came from behind a dumpster that was on the edge of the tree line. I kept running after her, but now I was running slower and out of breath because I was overweight and had a bunch of stuff on my vest. Now I was back to where my car was as the woman returned to the area. The woman then appeared again. This time she was coming at me though. I told her to get back, to stop, and I also said that I didn't want to shoot her, but she wouldn't budge, and she just started swatting her hands at me. I returned my taser and deployed it, but it didn't seem to work. I deployed it a second time, and the results were the same. As the ensuing confrontation continued, the woman grabbed my radio receiver, and I fell to the asphalt. The woman also fell with me. As she got up, I saw her pants fall, which showed her underwear. She was still holding the radio receiver, so she came over to me and started wrapping the cord around my neck. I was now struggling. I reached for my baton and swung it at the woman's leg to defend myself. However, she managed to grab the baton and struck me in the head. We then separated briefly. In that second, I drew up my firearm. Despite my shouts of "Stop, I don't want to shoot you," I took a step forward and fired 4 rapid shots, which hit the woman in her chest. She collapsed onto the asphalt. She initially moved before lying still and motionless. I kept yelling at her to get down, and she eventually stopped responding. I then called for assistance. When more officers arrived at the scene, I started to break up, crying a little in regret for shooting her, and I kept saying out loud, "Why'd she make me do that?" I am not a violent person, but I had to defend myself because I didn't want to lose my life. An officer named David went over to the woman and performed CPR on her for about 6.5 minutes while waiting for emergency responders. The EMT responders eventually showed up, and that woman was taken to the medical center, and she later died from her injuries. Her name was Melissa Tompkins, and she was 40 years old at her death. She was also homeless and had a severe mental illness and a history of meth use. I am still a police officer today working for that communication center. To my luck, nothing that chaotic has happened ever since.
Hey Swamp Dweller, I've been listening to your channel for a few months now, and I decided to send you one of my stories. I have a few questions about it, and would like to know your opinion. Before we begin, I want to give you some context. I come from a small town in northern Wisconsin. I am not going to say the town, because I would prefer not to be doxxed, but the whole town is split in half near the descendants of German and Irish settlers that came here in the 1850s and 60s. The whole town is immensely proud of our roots, especially my family. My dad's side of the family is German, and a lot of our family traditions come from our German side. However, my mom's side is Irish. When I was young, my grandfather, who lived in the town his entire life, would babysit us frequently. When he would babysit us after school, he would tell us stories from traditional Irish folklore. While my mother's family had lived in the area for nearly 200 years, my grandpa still held on deep to a thick Western Irish accent. Because of my grandfather's knowledge of all the old stories, my siblings and I had an intricate knowledge of Irish spirits and fairies. As the years went by, I joined the Boy Scouts and rapidly jumped through the ranks and eventually attended summer camps. I still, to this day, love camping. I fell in love with the summer camp, so much that the following year I returned as a camp staff member. The camp is old. It was founded in the 1940s, right after the Second World War had ended. Many of the buildings could be traced to those initial years, or were built in the same style and materials, giving the camp a rustic appearance. During the day, it was one of the homiest and welcoming places I have ever been to. At night, when the only light source is the dim light of the moon, it can be a different story. This environment spawned essentially a million different ghost stories, all of which I dismissed at first. I have had a handful of minor and slightly terrifying encounters, some of which I could tell you if you are interested. While admittedly, the camp was a little more than a bit creepy at night, I would often go on short walks to help myself relax. This is where I found myself in late June of 2018. My grandfather had been diagnosed with cancer shortly before I had left for camp. He had seemed in fine health before I left, and the doctors assured us that he would probably make a full recovery. Although, I had recently been having problems getting to sleep, which consequently led me to taking longer and longer walks as the summer had gone on. That night, there was a bright full moon, illuminating the entire camp. Combined with growing up in the woods my entire life, I was quite comfortable with walking around the forest at night. As for the animals, aside from the occasional mountain lion and local coyotes, bears, and wolves, they would rather leave you alone. What I'm trying to get at is that I had nothing to create any sense of worry for me at the time. The sense of security I had created in my mind allowed me to drift around the camp and lose myself in thought without a second glance. I decided to walk back to my cabin after checking my phone for the time. My phone said it was 11:17. Quickly, I mentally kicked myself, mostly because I need to shower, brush my teeth, and all the other bedtime rituals we perform. I shared my cabin with 14 other staff members, all guys I had worked with and got to know very well over the last 3 years. The entrance to the cabin was a little communal area, simply called the lounge, where we would all hang out until we had gone to bed. The only thing you will need to know is that my cabin is located directly over the boathouse. As I walked down the path to the cabin, I must have blacked out or something, because I strangely found myself on top of a waterfront hill. I do not actually remember going to the lakefront, nor remember walking there. I was understandably confused, but being at the waterfront hill is a stone throw away from my cabin, I did not really think about it much. I chose to start walking back to the cabin, grumbling about wasting time. However, I noticed something in the lake. I walked down 3 steps towards the water before I realized what it was. I saw what appeared to be a person hunched over in the water. Every now and again, some scout would get this brilliant idea to swim in the lake at night. That, or 2 staff members in the throes of a summer camp romance would decide to go skinny dipping. So I called out, "Hey there, can't be swimming right now." The individual in question did not respond to me, so I decided to walk down closer to the lake and call out to the person again. As I got closer, more and more features started to become apparent. I assumed it was a woman because the individual had long dark hair, and she was wearing what I could only assume would be a green ankle-length dress. I was about 3/4 of the way down the hill before I had stopped. I stared at her for a bit. I could tell that she was doing something in the water. Although, if you had to ask me what she was doing, I would not be able to tell you for the life of me. I decided to walk into the waterfront area itself. "Ma'am." I tried yelling at her to get her attention as I approached. At this point, I was maybe 20 feet away from her. As I approached the dock, I yelled at her again, "Ma'am." This time I had managed to catch her attention as she stopped what she was doing. "You can't be down here right now," I started to say as she slowly started to stand up. At this point, a shiver went up my spine. Although I would not be able to tell you why, my brain started hitting every alarm bell and giving me the instinct to flee, but I kept my feet planted in the sand below. When she fully stood up, it dawned on me why I was so uneasy. She was not making a single sound. When you move in water, you are bound to at least make a bit of sound, especially considering the amount of water that I could see was dripping off of her. When I was hit with this realization, I noticed that she had started to turn around. I could feel my brain begin to go into slow-mo before she had turned around. When she had fully turned around, I got a perfect look at her. She was pale. She practically glowed in the moonlight. I could tell she was soaked, not just like she was splashing in the water. Instead, it looked like she had just climbed out of the shower. Although the thing that strikes me even to this day and keeps me awake at night were her eyes. While her entire body was perfectly proportional, her eyes were much larger than any. I think her eyes would be the size of my fist, and they were jet black. Finally, my instincts took over, but instead of running off, I just fell back onto the solid boardwalk that the ranger had built the month before. She slowly approached me, until she was about 4 or 5 feet away from me. That is when she opened her mouth beyond what was humanly possible and she let out a scream. As soon as I heard that scream, I had become frozen in place and reached to clench my ears. I am not going to kid you with this. I could barely move. I just writhed around in pain on the ground until I could finally cover my ears. While now it sounded like a scream, it was now echoing in my head, but now at least I could move. I very slowly forced myself up with my elbows, not daring to uncover my ears. After getting to my feet, I slowly fought my way back up the boardwalk. After struggling with those first few steps, I was able to move easier and faster. After I made my way out of the waterfront area, the woman's scream began to wind down. As she wound down, I found out that I was able to sprint again. As I took those first 2 steps, I heard her begin to scream with the same intensity as before. Instead of paralyzing me as I did before, I was able to continue unabated. Frankly, I have no idea if she allowed me or not. At the time, I did not care. All I know is that I could still hear the scream and its echo, just as loudly as before. Eventually, I burst through the screen door on the cabin. I reached to my right and grabbed the massive oak door and slammed it shut. I locked it and grabbed one of the nearby couches and pushed it up to the door. I did not realize at the time, but 2 of my friends were sitting on the couch, one of which alone probably weighed near 300 pounds. Adrenaline really is the greatest thing. After building my makeshift barricade, I see the rest of the cabin had wandered into the lounge. Our program director saw how terrified I was and quickly pulled me into his room and asked me what had happened. Yet for some reason I could not tell him. Not because I didn't want to, but because instead, I physically could not produce the words needed to explain what had happened. I could not sleep that night, and I did not let anyone leave the cabin either. After the camp's morning flag ceremony, our camp director asked me to come into his office. After arriving, he explained to us that he had just received a call from our parents at the hospital that our grandfather had died the night before. I was shocked, not only that I had lost a relative that I have always been close with, but gears had started to turn in my head. I asked our camp director if he knew what time my grandfather had died. He told me he did not know. He then followed up and told me that if I wanted to take a day or 2 off, he would understand. I waived his offer and left to return to my department. As I walked out of the office, I sent my dad a text asking what time my grandfather died. A short time later, I felt my phone vibrate. I opened up the text I just received. It was my dad's response to my previous text. It read, 11:21. Why? I am almost certain that I saw a banshee. Banshees, for those who do not know, are a spirit from ancient Irish mythology. It is usually a sign of bad things to come or a death or something like that. My questions are, the banshee is an Irish spirit. Why was it in rural Wisconsin? I had asked all my family members if they saw something like that. None of them ever admitted to seeing something like that. Assuming they are telling the truth, and I have no reason to assume they are not, why am I the only one that has seen it? How did none of the other staff members in my cabin hear her scream? And why did it stop when I entered the cabin? So the following story happened around 2014 in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania. I was somewhere around 14 or 15 years old when I had this initial experience, and it left my mind until I began researching abductions and different paranormal entities. Everyone within my rural area lives in the forest and hunts religiously, and I am no exception to that rule. It was sometime in October, archery buck season, in Bedford, Pennsylvania. It was a normal evening of hunting at the base of the mountain in the swamps that my family owned. My dad was not near me at the time as he was on the opposite end, waiting for a large buck that he had been trying to ambush. I was sitting in my climber's stand in a pine tree-packed area with 2 trails running underneath me. It was still bright outside, and with just slight darkness to the area, enough that you could see a haze of flashlight. Yet, still, see clearly ahead without it. I was facing the mountainside so thick that pine trees mostly covered the sky from my view. I heard leaves begin to crackle, and suddenly roughly 5 or 6 deer ran full speed past my stand and back up the mountain. They came out of the pine saplings that lay in front of me, as if they came out of nowhere. It was at that moment a massive LED-looking light flashed and seemed to fill the sky above me. It was a bluish light and covered 3 to 4 treetops. As quickly as it flashed, it left, however, and when it left, everything turned dark. It was ridiculous to think that it turned dark that quickly, as I could not see the reflective side of my bow at that point. It was as if the sun just went out as soon as it went over the distant mountains on my back. I sat there dumbfounded, pondering what had happened for about 10 minutes before my dad came by on his side-by-side on the road. I left the stand that night weirded out by it, but I tried not to think much of it until the next day. I woke up with a cold sore in my left eye, which is not unusual for me, as it happened all the time due to sunlight or stress. I got dressed and went to school, but as the day went on, I began to get a bad headache. I made it to lunch when a lunch lady, who was a friend, looked at me bewildered. I had not noticed, but on the right side of my head, it was swollen severely. It was sticking out a good half-inch. Almost, it seemed to be giving me a lopsided appearance. She told me to go to the nurse's office quickly. I went to the nurse's suite, and she promptly called my mom to take me to the doctor, as she thought I may have contracted shingles from a teacher who had an outbreak that month. We went to the doctor, and he looked at me and sent me home after explaining it was probably a poison of some kind while I was up in that tree that got on me. I know my area, and there is not poison oak locally, and I do not get affected by poison ivy all that much. After I got home, I forgot about the situation and moved on. My head got better, and I did not give it much thought until this summer, when I had my first sleep paralysis situation. After I had it, I began to investigate different paranormal things, and for the first time, I looked into abduction stories and Mothman sightings. Conjunctivitis and different after effects made me think back to my experience with the tree stand. The reasons I'm bringing this story up is because of the lost time that went by, the sudden flash, the deer appearing from nowhere without any prior sound, and the after effects of the experience, which happened the day after. I do not remember seeing anything or having nightmares directly after the incident, but it makes me wonder what I saw that night. If anybody listening to the show has any idea what this could have been, please let me know down in the comments. It'd be greatly appreciated. So I'm not sure how creepy this is, but it was creepy for a Halloween day at sunset for me. I was walking my dog in Vermont on a Class 4 road. For those who don't know what that is a road that a town does not maintain well. About a quarter of a mile from my house, as I do almost every day for the past 3 years, I walk this path. There is a noticeably short road that leads to the river, and right behind my neighbor's house, who also has a dog. Walking up the road, my dog pulled me into the woods about 5 steps. She was adamant about smelling whatever was over there. When I looked up, I saw the vilest thing I've ever seen aside from a horror movie. It was the warm, steaming entrails of what looked like was a large animal. We were still about 10 feet away, so I paused for a moment, honestly thinking it was a Halloween prank, but what I believed happened was that a hunter, or something, had gutted an animal and left the guts in the woods. I was shaken at the sight, as I am no hunter, and it was creepy and horrifying. We turned around, and I had to pick up my small dog because she was interested in the smell. Although this is not a well-maintained road, local people and tourists still use it. 3 or 4 cars drove past me on our way down. I felt bad that my dog was not really getting her normal walk, so we went down this offshoot road down to the river, as we had done many times before. It was not even a 3-minute walk, and I want to stress this is a road that people use even though it leads to the river. As we approached the water, I can see the back of my neighbor's house at this point. I noticed that there was a gray Jeep parked across the river. I pulled my dog back towards the main road, but she was in attack mode because we never see people across the river. She did not want to come, so I coaxed her with some treats. Then the Jeep engine started. I started walking faster and picked up my dog. The Jeep began inching towards the river and eventually across it. I am running at this point up the hill. I was trying to call my sister using Siri on my phone because I was so scared, and I wanted someone to know what was happening. I got back up to the other road and started bolting towards the gated area because I did not think the Jeep would be able to follow me there. Before I could squeeze through the gate, the man yelled, "Hey you, I need to talk to you." I was really scared, but I thought maybe if I was nice, he wouldn't kill me. He said, "Hey, just to let you know, it's hunting season and I almost shot you." I do know it's hunting season, which is why both me and my dog have bright reflective pink vests on. I have never seen a hunter there in the 6 years I have lived on this road. "You can't be walking there during hunting season. We all need to do our part," he said shortly. I abandoned my instinct to be kind at this point. "I'll do my part by wearing a vest if you do yours by not shooting at me." He did not like that. He shook his head in anger and stepped on the gas, peeling away. I am so sorry for all the detail, but I want to emphasize that hunters have never been allowed to hunt in these areas, especially so close to home. I have no idea what this guy was trying to do, but I do intend to contact our local game wardens and town clerk to confirm, but I'm pretty sure this guy was off his rocker and was looking for an excuse to cause a confrontation. Thanks for reading my somewhat creepy encounter. I'm sorry if it wasn't that creepy, but I know it might be a nice break from some of the more intense stories you share on the channel.
Thanks for listening to these creepy and downright strange horror stories from the great outdoors that'll freak you out tonight. Honestly, story 1 was my favorite tonight, and I would love to know in the comments down below what your favorite one was. Nearly losing your life to somebody who's not mentally all there, absolutely deranged on some sort of drug, is very scary. If you've ever watched those cops shows, you can see how that inhuman strength can definitely overcome a taser from time to time. If you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it, and that helps the swamp grow its ever-expanding waters. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new episode as I upload them multiple times a week on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. If you've been missing your Swamp Dweller content on a daily basis, you can join me on my second channel, Swamp Dweller Live, where I upload videos almost every single day on all things internet degenerate. Different types of stories, still kinda scary, still pretty horrific, just a different genre of doing it.